How do I even begin to talk and introduce myself when all the things that happened on Saturday night were just crazy to me? And then all the fight announcements for Friday on the day of the conference, the press conference, and the seasonal press conference also that happened. There's just so much to unpack. I do not know where to start. So I'm not even going to introduce myself. You guys know who I am, the MMA girl, Jess. Let's get into UFC 323 and unpack this crazy event, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, and of course what we think of what's happened and what will happen in the future now with all the fights that have been announced and the new champions that will be defending their belts in 2026. So to begin with, of course, as usual, the prelim card was crazy, insane, amazing. Nowadays with the UFC, we know that the main card may have some crazy bits and some exciting things happening, but the prelim card is always crazy. And to begin with, of course, we had Myron Santos, who KO'd Mohamed Naimov in the third round, just over 30 seconds. Insane way to start the card. Brilliant KO. Mansour Abdul Malik, who submitted his opponent, Antonio Trocoli, in the first round, which was crazy as well. Amazing start to the card. And then we had a light heavyweight bout, of course, which featured Ivo Aslan and his opponent, Iwo Baraniewski. And Baraniewski was almost knocked out at some point, and somehow he came back from the dead and did his work on Ivo Aslan. Ivo Aslan, of course, was unfortunately KO'd in the first round because all this happened in the first round. This fight was from start to finish in the first 1 minute and 20 seconds, 1 minute and 30 seconds. It was all fire, all action, all guns blazing, and it was crazy. One of my best and favorite fights of the last while, especially in a prelim fight card. And Baraniewski has a chin on him, and I hope he keeps it because he's going to need it for the light heavyweight division. But Ivo Aslan, unfortunately, of course, came away with a loss. Didn't expect that because he'd almost KO'd his opponent. So I thought, he's going to win this fight. But coming back from the dead like that, crazy aura, guys. Crazy aura. Then, of course, we had Edson Barboza, who was coming back to face the returning Jalin Turner, who, of course, came back after his semi-retirement. And I said to myself, the height difference may give Jalin Turner a disadvantage or an advantage in this fight. But in any case, I hope that he wins the fight, because coming back after retiring from the sport, finding his love for the sport again and coming back to training and he looks much fitter. He looks in shape. He's changed his look, his hair. Everything has changed, and he, of course, won. In the very first round, he got that KO, and it was beautiful. And, of course, he cried at the end of that fight because, of course, getting back into the octagon, he got a win in there, and it was beautiful to see, and I was very happy to see our dear Jalin Turner get the win after his return, after retiring. So, beautiful, beautiful fight. Then, of course, we had Marvin Vettori, who was facing Bruno Ferreira. Bruno Ferreira, who came in a few pounds overweight at the weigh-ins, but of course came in and stole the show with a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful fight. Lots of action in that fight. Credit must be given to Mr. Marvin Vettori because his chin is something, however. I think for any other fighter that comes across Bruno Ferreira, some of those shots would have knocked them out. And as you've seen, Bruno Ferreira's track record is knockouts and submissions only, practically. So Marvin Vettori, he has a chin on him. We can give him that one. He has a great chin on him, but great fight from Bruno. Excited to see what's going to happen for him next. Sadly, of course, Marvin Vettori is on a losing streak now, 2-fight losing streak since his last loss against Brendan Allen, and it's not getting better from here. Hopefully he'll get back on his horse and ride back to the win column. But for now, it's all about Bruno Ferreira and what's he going to be doing in the middleweight division from now onwards. As far as ZIAM versus Nassim Sadikov, a very tight fight at the start. Of course, Nassim Sadikov had the upper hand in the first round, but coming into the second round, Faraz ZIAM got the KO, and it was brilliant to see. Faraz ZIAM, of course, managed by Ali Abdelaziz, the manager who manages most of the stars at the UFC, or the big stars at least. He's going to be pushed in this lightweight division. I just see it happening, and he's got a great record, 18 victories to 4 defeats now. And of course, he's a really good fighter. So I think he's going to make a great work of the lightweight division when he gets up in those rankings. He is now ranked top 15. And he said to the UFC, I'd like a top 10 opponent, please. And they said, listen, we'll give you a top 15 opponent and then you'll work your way to a top 10 opponent. And I think that he'll win. He's on a great streak right now. So all guns blazing for Faraz ZIAM, the Français, who is, of course, on a great winning streak himself. Terence McKinney versus Chris the Problem Duncan. Terence T-Rex McKinney, of course, being the favorite in this fight just by a slight bit. But Chris Duncan, of course, was epic in his fight. Another fight, just as we saw with Ibo Aslan and Baraniewski, he of course came back from the dead. He was roughed up at the start of this fight. We thought he would get KO'd by Terence McKinney, but that's what you've got to remember. He's a Scotsman, and the Scotsmen don't go down easily, and they just have that grit. And as he said at the end of the fight, we just have something that you can't teach. We Scottish people have a grit that will not be defied, and he just showed that. Terence McKinney was probably thinking, I'm winning this fight, I'm landing those punches, I'm landing those shots, he's going to go down at some point. But no, he did not go down, and it's you, Terence McKinney, who went down and got submitted with a dart choke that was brilliantly placed. And I cannot wait to see what Chris Duncan will do next. He needs to get a top 5 opponent as soon as possible to see whether in the lightweight division he is worthy of the top 5 at least. And I'd love to see Chris Duncan take on Dan Hooker or Benoit Saint-Denis, someone who is crazy like him, and that will put on a great show and show us what he's made of against someone who is top competition now. And of course, for Manuel Torres, the night was brilliant as he won by first round KO against Grant Dawson. Of course, unfortunately for Grant, he did not come away with the W this time around. Maybe it was the fact that his wife was not in his corner this time that made the difference. But anyway, Manuel Torres dominating in those first 2 minutes and got the KO finish over Grant Dawson. Very violent, very brutal for Grant. And of course, Manuel Torres, a huge threat for the lightweight division now, because who isn't? I mean, on this prelim card, we have a few lightweights who have really stood out. And I cannot wait to see who's going to be facing who to determine who's going to be breaking into the top 15, top 10. And there's some real good candidates for anyone in the top 10 to face next. So this main card, I don't even know what to say. I mean, I got none of my picks correct. None of them. I'm not going to beat around the bush, or maybe, no, I got all of them wrong, but for good reason, because I couldn't have seen any of this coming. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I could have seen this coming. No. A draw between Jan Błachowicz and Bogdan Guskov, I did not see that coming. I mean, I thought Guskov, who was on a great streak, KOing his opponents left and right, I thought he'd get the win here. I thought Jan Błachowicz was done at his ripe old age of 41 years old. However, I was saying to myself, okay, maybe Jan Błachowicz will get the win here. Former champion, light heavyweight champion, why not? But did not expect to draw. If anything, Jan Błachowicz took that fight, and unfortunately for him, the judges were not in agreement, because of course 2 out of the 3 judges gave this fight to Jan Błachowicz and 1 out of the 3 gave it to Guskov, but due to the points given for each round, it came to a majority draw. That's very unfortunate. I think both guys must have been very, very upset coming out of that fight. It wasn't a boring fight, however. This was quite an entertaining fight, but both guys did not do enough to secure a UD, or at least a split decision. So unfortunately for Bogdan Guskov, it will be a majority draw, and for Jan Błachowicz, at least it's not a loss, because he's coming off of a loss from UFC London against Carlos Ulberg. So both have got now a new draw added to their record, which is unfortunate, but that's what happens, guys. MMA is so unpredictable, and this card was the definition of unpredictable, to say the least. Of course, Henry Cejudo versus Payton Talbott was a little bit more predictable. I personally thought Henry Cejudo would go out with a bang and not go out with a face completely disfigured. I'm going to try and insert a photo here. I don't know if the YouTube rules allow me to show this, but Dana White put it on his Instagram story, so I'm going to put it up on my YouTube. Hopefully I won't get striked. But Henry Cejudo came out of this fight with cheeks looking like he'd put filler in his cheeks until they were about to explode, and Payton Talbott is unscathed. What a talent Payton Talbott is. Payton Talbott, of course, being a young, competitive, skilled competitor for the bantamweight division, and he's a contender now that could one day face Merab Dvalishvili or the current champion Petr Yan, but we'll get onto that next. But anyway, Henry Cejudo retired, of course, after that fight, and he was saying to Dana White after the decision was read out by Bruce Buffer, of course, he was saying to Dana that, look at me, I know I'm done. This kid just completely ran through me. And afterwards, he even tweeted, how good is Barcelos in this bantamweight division? I mean, we got to give props to Barcelos, despite his age, despite his fighting style, despite what you can think about him when you see him. He is very, very tough, because Payton Talbott at this level, putting away an Olympic gold medalist in the way he did, is crazy stuff. But he's now at 11-1. His only defeat came from Barcelos, of course. Maybe a bump in the road, maybe a mistake, maybe his game plan wasn't on check. But in any case, Barcelos, respect on your name. And Henry Cejudo, congratulations for your amazing career, double champ. One of the only double champs in the UFC that we can actually call double champ, not champion of two divisions non-simultaneously. He was champion of two divisions simultaneously, which is not a feat that we can now say is common in the UFC, because we no longer see that really. So Henry Cejudo, congratulations, champ. We love seeing you fight. From the ups and downs to everything, I'm very happy to have been able to witness your career. And we can't wait to see what's next for you. Of course, he does not want to become a coach, he said. I do not want to coach anyone. He'll be sticking with Kamaru Usman on their podcast Pound for Pound and probably doing other things UFC based or MMA related, but not coaching. In any case, we'll see him on our screens if you guys watch his podcast with Kamaru. Next up, we had, of course, Brandon Moreno, who was taking on Tatsuro Taira. Tatsuro Taira, the Japanese prospect who I thought would meet his match with Brandon Moreno. He did not. Of course, second round KO for Tatsuro Taira. Of course, now Tatsuro Taira is in contention for a number one contender spot for the flyweight belt, of course. I think that he would be a great opponent for Joshua Van. And I think that Brandon Moreno has met his match. And it's the first time that Brandon Moreno has been TKO'd by anyone in the flyweight division of the UFC. So, Tatsuro Taira, congratulations. You are the real deal. And of course, a lot of people were saying it was an early stoppage. I think it was a little bit early. The ref could have let Brandon Moreno fight back a bit more before he ended the fight. But in any case, he looked like he was going to be down bad. So maybe it was the best decision for him to preserve his brain cells. But in any case, I found him a little bit confident. And unfortunately, that didn't work out for him. So Tatsuro Taira is the real deal. And I cannot wait to see what is next for him in the flyweight division. If it's not Joshua Van, then I'd love to see him against the winner of this weekend's bout, Tatsuro Taira versus Mano Cap or Brandon Royval. Now, of course, for the co-main, which ended in, of course, 26 seconds. Oh my God. I'm still not over it, if you can tell. I'm not over the main event. I'm not over the main card. Like, the whole main card just completely off to me. What was that, honestly? I've been looking into what people think of this fight. And of course, a lot of people were annoyed with the way that Joshua Van celebrated his win. He's 24 years old, guys. I don't think that any 24-year-old who wins a UFC belt, even in that way, would not celebrate his victory. It's obvious that it may not have been the right time, not the right place, but who cares? This man has won a belt in the flyweight division at 24 years old. He is the only fighter and the first fighter to ever contend for a belt, to get a title shot, who was born after the year 2000. And now he is champion, even though it was not, of course, the circumstances that should have been played out. Of course, he should have won in another way if he'd have won that fight. Of course, most people didn't think he would win that fight, including myself, of course, who got every single pick wrong. It was an unfortunate situation, and it happens. Tom Aspinall has had it recently happen to him a few years ago at UFC London before he was champion. Of course, he had the same thing happen but to his leg whilst fighting Curtis Blades. And that's just life. He got a loss on his record, which, of course, is unfair. But a TKO is a TKO, even though it wasn't really Curtis Blades that did anything to him. But that's how it goes. Curtis Blades has his victory. Tom Aspinall has his defeat. The same goes for Pantoja. Of course, Joshua Van, of course, was challenging for the title. So there was a lot more on the line. And it was very unfortunate to see it happen in the first 20 seconds of that fight, because we had a lot more to see. So, of course, a rematch is, of course, supposed to be booked when Pantoja is coming back. But in the meantime, Joshua Van will, of course, have to defend his belt, even though he is, for some people, not the true champion of the flyweight division, but he is the current champion. If you like, we can call him the interim champion because Pantoja's injured. But who knows? Maybe if Pantoja comes back and they do fight, Pantoja may not capture his belt back just yet, because Joshua Van, I think he had a lot left in the tank, and I wanted to see what Joshua Van would do against someone like Pantoja. So maybe one day when Pantoja comes back and Joshua Van is still champion, maybe he won't be champion again, but if he still is after defending his belt a couple of times, or at least once, maybe he will beat Pantoja. Who knows? But we did not see, of course, in 26 seconds, enough stuff from Pantoja and from Joshua Van to judge how that fight would have gone out. But in any case, Joshua Van, congratulations. I think that celebrating on top of the octagon is a must when you are the newest champion and the youngest champion of your division and of the whole of the UFC currently. So I didn't have any issues seeing him celebrate. I just think that I wouldn't have been as excited as him, even though it's a great, of course, a huge moment for his life. But his life is about to change immediately right now, and his life is probably changing already but I wouldn't have celebrated as much just because that's not how I would have wanted to win that. But Dana White told him backstage, you know, a win's a win. Most people are sad to lose in that way, but if you win in that way, then who cares? You are the champion now. Let me know what you think of Joshua Van. Do you believe his celebration was not worthy of his victory? And do you think he overdid the celebration after seeing Pantoja dislocate his shoulder? Because it was the shoulder in the end. The UFC made it blatantly clear that we had to sit through 4 to 5 replays, slow motion, different angles of his arm breaking, but I didn't see a shoulder pop. But unfortunately, it was a shoulder. Apparently, they popped it back in afterwards, and he's got to have, of course, a lot of tests done to see if there's anything damaged after that kind of fall. I remember when Joe Rogan was saying to Megan and Livy, "Are you sure you said shoulder? Why are you saying shoulder? Are you sure?" It did not like the shoulder. It was a shoulder, guys. I don't know how the anatomy works. Maybe when you fall and you just look at your shoulder, your arm pops in a way that doesn't look good, but it's not your arm that pops. It's just the fact that your shoulder's dislocated, so it just looks like your arm pops. Maybe. Any doctors in the audience, let us know. But let me guys know what you thought of that fight, even though it was 26 seconds, and what you think of the new champion, Joshua Van. And who do you think Joshua Van should face next? Should he face Tatsuro Taira, or should he face the winner of this weekend's bout between Mano Cap and Brendan Royval? Let me know in the comments down below. And finally, of course, we had Merab Dvalishvili, the bantamweight king at the time, facing his arch nemesis, Petr Yan, the Russian Achilles heel now of Merab Dvalishvili, because there's no way of putting this. He's Merab. He may be the machine, but he's not superhuman. He's not a robot. Fighting that much in a year against some really tough opponents with some long bouts, because most of Merab's bouts go to the 4th or 5th round, if not the decision. So fighting that much, fighting some real key players in the bantamweight division, and fighting Petr Yan just before Christmas is very tough to deal with. This is a Petr Yan that maybe wouldn't have beaten Merab in 2023 because he wasn't at Merab's level at the time. Now he is. And this version of Petr Yan, no one beats this guy. No one. No one. Even Sean O'Malley back in the day when he got the decision win over Petr Yan, a lot of people, of course, were arguing that Petr Yan won that fight. I think that now, if you see Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley, now he would win that fight fair and square. I think the difference, however, because it's so weird to say, Merab just beats Sean O'Malley so easily. I wouldn't say the word so easily, but he beat him twice, once via UD, once via submission. So how is that possible that Merab beats twice a Sean O'Malley who beat Petr Yan? Whereas Petr Yan, 100% healthy, beats Merab in the way he beat Merab. I mean, MMA math just confuses me sometimes. But anyway, Petr Yan, this version of Petr Yan, if this guy turns up to every fight, it's over for everyone in the bantamweight division. There's no way in hell. Of course, some reporters asked him, and I found it so funny when some reporters were like, well, if Sean O'Malley wins his fight against Song Yudong in January, would he be another title contender for you? And he just laughed. He was like, brother, no. I had to work 5 years, he said. He had to work 5 years to get that belt back. Sean O'Malley is not going to be coming back and trying to face me again. He's going to have to work his way up to a fight with me. And he said the same for Merab. Of course, Merab wants an instant rematch. Dana White probably said, yes, you can have that. But Petr Yan does not seem to want to rematch from Merab just now. He says, go and hang out in your jacuzzi, and we'll talk about that later, because it is true that Merab deserves a title shot, deserves, of course, a rematch after losing his belt last Saturday. But does he deserve it immediately? Because Petr Yan, when he lost his belt against Aljamain Sterling, due to an illegal move, he had to wait a long time to get a title shot back. So I'm not sure, but we'll see what the UFC decide to do, because now Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili 3 is very juicy. They're 1-on-1. You got to finish the trilogy, guys. And if Petr Yan's not happy with that, then of course the UFC will try and persuade him to be. And if they can't, they may propose someone else in the meantime, and Merab may take a break, because I think that's what he needs. Merab needs at least 6 months off before he comes back to the octagon now. He's given all he could in the last few years, and as champion, he has defended his belt so many times. And just in 2025, defending his belt 4 times, but obviously losing in the 4th attempt to defend his title is so noble. You can't disrespect that record. So for me, he should take a long needed break. He, of course, won't, but he needs it. And I'd like to see him at least not in the octagon for at least 6 months. He'll obviously be back training in probably already. But he needs to go back and go to training. I wouldn't say he needs to improve anything apart from taking down Petr Yan, because as we could see, Petr Yan was untakedownable. Merab took Petr Yan down officially 2 times, but the way in which he took him down was by carrying the man and body slamming him. So it is a takedown, but it's not in the way that usually you see Merab do. He usually would take people down in the wrestler jiu-jitsu type way, and he gets his takedowns every time. But with Petr Yan, that was not possible. Then, of course, you had Petr Yan, who attempted 9 takedowns, and he got 5 of those takedowns. Merab, he got 2 takedowns out of 29 attempts. Last time it was 59, so he reduced it a bit. This time around it was 29. And Merab, of course, said on the mic, I tried to make this fight more entertaining for you guys. I tried to stay on the feet a bit more to entertain you. It was very entertaining, Merab, but we could see that it wasn't because you wanted to entertain us by staying on the feet. It was because you could not physically take Petr Yan down. And with the 2 submission attempts, like 2 guillotine attempts, which were just not locked in, he was just never going to get that submission, never going to use his position against a Petr Yan like that. No. They have almost the same record now with 21 victories for Merab and 20 victories for Petr Yan, with a total of 5 defeats each on their records. So that for me calls for the rematch. Third fight trilogy, worth seeing, but I'd like to see Petr Yan defend his belt first and then see Merab come back to rematch him in the summer, maybe at the White House. Let me know what you guys thought of UFC 323. Tell me all the things you think about Merab. What do you think of Petr Yan? What do you think of his future in the UFC for Merab? Should he stay on the bench a bit longer, or should he come back soon? What do you think he'll do? Let me know. And who do you think should face Petr Yan next for the bantamweight belt?